The Detroit Lions may be heading into 2026 with one of the deepest rosters this franchise has built in years, but there is still a massive difference between having talent on paper and having players actually take that next leap when the season starts. And that is exactly where things get interesting right now, because there are several players on this roster that are entering a season where expectations are no longer small. The pressure is real now, not because they are bad players, but because this team is officially in win now mode and every single position matters if Detroit wants to stay at the top of the NFC. One of the biggest names quietly sitting in that category right now is Isaac Tesla. The Lions invested heavily in him after trading up to draft him, and now people inside this fan base are starting to realize the organization clearly believes he can become a major part of this offense moving forward. What made Tesla stand out immediately was his ability in the red zone. Every time he touched the field last season, it felt like he had a chance to score. His size, his wingspan, and especially his hands already made him a dangerous target for Jared Goff near the goal line. But the exciting part here is that Detroit does not just want him to be a touchdown specialist anymore. The expectation now is much bigger than that. With Tim Patrick no longer holding that important role in the offense, and with Khalif Raymond gone as well, there is an opportunity opening up for Tesla to become that physical number 3 receiver that can completely change how defenses line up against the Lions. Imagine what happens if defenses are forced to pay attention to Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, and now another large target in the middle of the field. That changes everything for Ben Johnson's old system, and now what this new offensive structure wants to become moving forward. And apparently Tesla himself understands exactly what is at stake, because one of the biggest focuses of his offseason has been improving his release off the line of scrimmage, along with his quickness and overall speed. If those improvements are real, then Detroit may suddenly have another serious weapon entering 2026. Not necessarily a superstar receiver, but the type of player that makes the entire offense harder to stop. That is the difference between a good offense and a complete offense. Another player sitting directly under the spotlight is DJ Reed, and this situation feels completely different because, unlike Tesla, Reed already got paid. The Lions gave him a massive 3-year, $48 million contract because they believed he could stabilize the secondary opposite Terrion Arnold. But last season simply did not go the way anybody expected. Injuries became a major issue, especially the hamstring problems that caused him to miss multiple games. And when he was on the field, the production was disappointing. There were too many moments where he got beat in coverage, and Lions fans saw a player that looked nowhere near the level Detroit thought they were signing. Still, there is an important detail here that cannot be ignored. Before the injuries fully started affecting him, there were flashes. There were moments where you could see why Detroit targeted him in the first place, and that is exactly why this upcoming season feels so critical for him personally and for the entire defense. Because if DJ Reed returns healthy and finally plays at the level this front office expected, then suddenly this secondary looks completely different. Now imagine a healthy DJ Reed playing alongside Terrion Arnold, Rock Ya-Sin, Roger McCreary, and a young player like Keith Abney pushing for snaps. That depth starts looking dangerous. That is the type of secondary that can completely elevate the defense. But if Reed struggles again, then the conversation changes fast. Detroit can save significant cap space by moving on after the season, and younger players are already waiting for opportunities behind him. So this is not just about performance anymore. This is about his future with the organization. Then you look at the offensive line, and Christian Mahogany may quietly be entering one of the most important years of his career already. The Lions loved the value they got when they drafted him, and many people inside the fan base believed he was one of the steals of that draft class. But injuries slowed everything down last year, and now there is legitimate competition around him. Miles Frazier stepped in during Mahogany's absence and showed enough to make this battle very real. That matters because Detroit cannot afford weakness on the offensive line. Protecting Jared Goff remains one of the most important priorities on this team, especially with expectations higher than ever entering 2026. The Lions already feel confident about pieces like Penei Sewell, Frank Ragnow, Graham Glasgow, and Tate Ratledge, but left guard still feels like the position everybody is watching carefully. And honestly, that pressure may end up bringing the best out of Mahogany, because if he locks down that role and stays healthy, this offensive line could once again become one of the biggest strengths on the roster. But if he struggles, Miles Frazier is sitting right there waiting for his chance to take over. What makes all of this so fascinating is that these are not situations situations built around hopeless players or roster disasters. These are situations where Detroit already has talent, but now needs growth. The Lions are no longer a rebuilding football team searching for hope. This is a contender trying to eliminate weaknesses before the season even starts. And honestly, that is why this upcoming year feels so massive for several players across this roster, because if just a few of these names truly take that next step, Detroit may become even more dangerous than people realize right now. But out of all these players entering pressure-filled situations in 2026, which one do you think absolutely has to step up the most for the Lions to stay among the NFC's elite? Terrion Arnold might actually be one of the most important players on the entire Lions defense heading into 2026. And the reason goes far beyond just talent. This is now year 3 for him, and everybody in the NFL understands what that usually means for a cornerback drafted with high expectations. By this point, excuses begin to disappear. Teams want results, fans want consistency, and players either establish themselves as long-term answers or serious questions start getting asked. The interesting thing with Arnold is that the conversation around him has become complicated because there are clearly two sides to the story right now. On one side, there are fans frustrated about the injuries and the off-field distractions that surrounded him last season. Detroit supporters simply do not want to hear about unnecessary issues anymore. They want full focus on football because this team is chasing championships now. But on the other side, there were legitimate signs of growth before the injuries interrupted his momentum again. That is what makes this season feel so important for him. There are people inside this fan base that still strongly believe Terrion Arnold can become a true cornerstone piece in this secondary. And honestly, the confidence comes from his mentality as much as his physical ability. He does not look like a player crushed by criticism. He does not seem mentally shaken by outside noise or social media pressure. That matters at cornerback because it is one of the hardest positions in football mentally. If a cornerback loses confidence, everything falls apart quickly, and that is where many Lions fans see a difference with Arnold. Even after difficult moments, he still carries himself like someone who believes he belongs. That mindset gives people hope that if he can finally stay healthy for a full season, the jump could happen naturally. The talent has never really been the question. Health has been the question. Availability has been the question. Because when he was fully engaged and playing confidently, there were moments where he absolutely looked capable of becoming the player Detroit envisioned when they drafted him. Now, combine that possibility with a healthier DJ Reed, and suddenly this defense starts looking far more balanced. The Lions already believe their defensive front can create pressure. They already trust players like Aiden Hutchinson to disrupt games. But coverage on the back end is what can truly unlock this defense and take it to another level. That is why Arnold's development feels massive right now. Then there is Derek Barnes, and his situation may actually be one of the most underrated storylines on the entire roster. Not because people dislike him, but because his role quietly became much bigger after the loss of Alex Anzalone. That changes the entire dynamic of the linebacker room. Barnes has always been viewed as a solid football player. Not flashy, not a superstar linebacker, but dependable, physical, someone willing to do the dirty work. The Lions clearly valued him enough to extend him, even while some fans questioned the move. But now the expectations rise because the environment around him changed dramatically. When you lose a veteran presence like Anzalone, someone has to absorb the pressure that comes with that leadership void and production loss. Jack Campbell looks like he is becoming a true star already, maybe even an all-pro caliber linebacker in the future. But Detroit still needs another linebacker beside him that can stabilize the unit consistently, and that is where Barnes enters the picture. The Lions have options behind him, but there are still uncertainties. Malcolm Rodriguez brings toughness and energy, but expecting him to fully replace Anzalone immediately is a difficult ask. Jimmy Rolder is another young name people are watching closely, and there is belief he could eventually carve out a serious role later in the season. But at the start of the year, a lot of the responsibility naturally shifts toward Barnes. That means Detroit needs more than just solid now. They need him to elevate his game. They need more consistency, more impact plays, and stronger overall command of the defense. And honestly, if Barnes does take that next step, the linebacker concerns surrounding this team could calm down very quickly. What stands out about all these situations together is how interconnected everything feels. If Isaac Tesla becomes a reliable offensive weapon, the offense gains another dangerous layer. If Christian Mahogany stabilizes the offensive line, Jared Goff gets cleaner protection. If DJ Reed rebounds and Terrion Arnold stays healthy, the secondary transforms completely. If Derek Barnes elevates his level after losing Anzalone beside him, the linebacker unit survives a major transition. That is why this upcoming season feels so fascinating for Detroit. This roster already has proven stars. Everybody knows what Amon-Ra St. Brown can do. Everybody knows Jahmyr Gibbs is explosive. Everybody knows Penei Sewell is elite. But championship teams are not built only on stars. They are built when the next tier of players takes major leaps at the right time. And honestly, that may be exactly what decides whether the Lions simply remain a good playoff team or finally break through to another level entirely in 2026. Another thing that makes this entire conversation even more important is the timing of where the Detroit Lions are as a franchise right now. A few years ago, fans were simply hoping to see progress. They wanted competitiveness. They wanted culture changes. They wanted to believe the rebuild was finally moving in the right direction. But now the standard is completely different. This team is expected to compete for the top of the NFC every single season, and once expectations reach that level, every weakness gets magnified immediately. That is why the pressure surrounding these players feels heavier now than it would have a few years ago. Detroit is no longer sneaking up on opponents. Teams are preparing specifically for the Lions. Defensive coordinators are studying ways to slow down Jared Goff and Jahmyr Gibbs. Offensive coordinators are trying to expose weaknesses in Detroit's secondary. The target on this team is real now, and honestly, that is why someone like Isaac Tesla becomes so interesting entering this year, because when defenses focus heavily on Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams, opportunities start opening for secondary weapons. The Lions know that, the coaching staff knows that, and clearly they believe Tesla has the physical tools to punish defenses in those moments. You can already picture the type of role Detroit wants him to grow into. Big target, reliable hands, strong red zone presence, chain mover across the middle, the kind of receiver that quietly becomes a nightmare because defenses are too distracted by everybody else around him, and if he develops chemistry with Jared Goff early in the season, this offense may become even more difficult to defend than people expect. The same goes for Christian Mahogany, because offensive line depth becomes absolutely critical during long NFL seasons.